Dave Garrison. I love talking about leadership and leaders. I open up with Dave's kind of hobbies, passions are sailing, flying, and golfing. I wonder what you think the common thread is between those three. We dive right into the difference between a manager and a leader, talking about what red flags some leaders do. Just asking simple questions. He's got these great stories of what consulting with one firm where somebody wanted a raise and they didn't want to give a raise because the other employees at that level didn't deserve a raise or shouldn't get a raise. So he said, ask them why, and come to find out his girlfriend wanted to go to the movies and he couldn't afford it. So they said, okay, well, we'll just give you movie tickets every weekend, and it made that employee so just asking questions at a car dealership, what he did there with some of the salespeople. But he wrote a great book, The Buying Advantage. I asked him what the takeaway is from there, but he talks about, my three pieces of what I've learned most about having a small business is join a peer group, adopt an operating system, and then hire a coach. He complements, or he actually contributes and comments on all three of those points. But it's a great conversation with Dave Garrison and just great wisdom in helping these businesses and leaders grow. Thanks for listening and watching. Hi, I'm Joey Pinz, and here's my 45-second introduction. After starting my business in the 90s, I started developing poor habits of eating in my diet because of working way too much. Before you know it, I found myself 340 pounds. The doctor told me if I don't lose the weight, I'm not going to see my daughter graduate. Took the next 7 months, lost 130 pounds. People think there's some secret. Ask me, how'd you lose that weight? Like there's some secret. There is no secret. How'd I lose the weight? Just one word: discipline. I've had other successes in life, and I attribute them all to discipline. Now, I'm not the king of discipline, but I believe that it can help all of us. Friends, colleagues convinced me to start a podcast. The podcast mission: how do we better ourselves and society? I talk to interesting people in health, fitness, sport, wellness, business, technology, science, art, and culture. And I eventually ask them how discipline plays a role in their life. Podcast vision: growth through learning from others. Dave Garrison, thank you for your time today. Can you draw a parallel? What's the commonality between sailing, flying, and golfing?
Oh, interesting. I would say that they are all adventures into the unknown. Because every time you go sailing, the winds are going to be different, the terrain will be different, the waves will be different, the other boats will be different. Flying, ditto. And golfing, I found myself in the most unusual places I never planned to be. And you've got to figure out, how do you deal with the unexpected? But that's also the adventure of it. So the other thing is that they are small teams. Flying is a small team of typically, say, 5 or 6 people, because it's the fueling person, it's the controller, it's you, it's a co-pilot. Sailing, it's a small crew. And golfing, I guess, is just me, because I create my own issues. So people say, oh, do you love to compete in golf? And I said, the competition is with myself, dude. Right. It's just me and me, but great fun.
Great fun. And the thing about golf is that you'll never have the same shot twice. Sure, the ball could be in the same place, but it could be a different time of day. The grass could be cut differently. There's different winds. The pin's in a different location. You just had a birdie or a double. So it constantly changes. But what I see you saying, Dave, in those three fun hobbies is there's just a lot of problem solving.
There is. And there's also another thing, which is we are taught to focus. Let's be really focused. And focus can work against you as well. Because if you watch, for example, professional golfers, as they walk up to the ball, they will be taking a broad view into the situation. They'll be looking at the treetops to see what the wind is. They'll be looking at the lie, the cut of the grass. It's taking in this broad spectrum before they create their plan, and then focus on executing their plan, thinking about one or two things only. Because one of the things that I fight in golf, along with a number of other golfers, are the voices in my head. Oh, I just read Golf Digest. Oh, I just saw a YouTube video. I got to remember these 12 things. Well, you can't remember 12 things, because you're going to fail at 12 things. And so one of the things we talk about in the book, The Buying Advantage, is focus. 3 is greater than 7. And so, yes, I want to take in the total perspective of the wind, the terrain, the everything else. And then I want to focus on what's most important and just work on executing those few things.
I often, I get paired up with some people when I'm playing, and sometimes the higher handicaps will say, do you have any tips? Do you have any? And, I respect the golf professionals way too much. This whole, you mentioned 14 tips. I got to keep my elbow in. I got, all this kind of
Yeah,
thing.
yeah.
I just say pick a target and just hit it, man. Just pick a target and hit it. Don't overthink it, please.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing is when, out of a desire to improve, we will go to Golf Digest and we'll see 22
Mm,
swing tips. And then we'll watch YouTube videos because I want my putting to be better and whatever. The challenge is we don't have the knowledge of the game to understand what applies to us
mm,
because we all have blind spots. So in piloting, we call that your six. You can't see behind you. And one of the key ideas in the book is that all of us are smarter than any of us,
hmm,
meaning others have different blind spots, but collectively, we can see a pretty perfect picture of what the world looks like. And so, even though we singularly pursue those tips from all those places, it works against us because we don't know which ones to apply at what time where because we're blinded.
hmm. When I was getting my private pilot license, I loved how there's checklists, there's SOPs, there's procedures for everything. It's just so structured. It's wonderful.
And you found the freedom of flying.
And then you find the freedom of flying in that structure. It is amazing. But when you're up there and you're just one with the machine, it's I've let it pass, but boy, do I miss it.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. What a great experience.
Piloting it is really, really, really special. Dave, what's the difference between a leader and a manager?
Yeah, great question. Both are necessary. And the way I think about it is managers tell and leaders listen.
Hmm.
Managers are about checklists and what we have to do, leaders are about inspiring and setting context. So, leaders are about reinforcing the vision. Leaders are about listening deeply to what people are experiencing, what their insights are. A humbling lesson for me as a young manager was the people doing the work actually know much better than I do about what can be done differently or what's working and what's not working.
Hmm.
However, what was modeled to me from the people I was working with is, oh, I have an open door policy. If they have anything to share, they'll just tell me, which is a fool's errand. Because if
Hmm.
people don't know that they are part of the solution and you value their experience, they're not going to share it. And so
Hmm.
it's part of what a leader does is to create the environment in which great can happen. So creating an environment is an important role of the leader and not so much of the manager, which is about executing whatever it is that we've agreed to.
I once had one of my head technicians who managed many of the other technicians, come to me and say that he was a leader and he needed this and that, and just he wasn't a leader. He wasn't a leader, Dave. That's a difficult discussion because now ego gets in the way. But a leader, like you said, listens more, looks forward, looks at the bigger picture. Managers looking at the day to day. That can be kind of an ego. I think I handled it well, and we kind of rearranged his view on it. But it's a very tough discussion sometimes.
It is. And Joey, so one of the things that I found to really be effective and is reflected in some of the stories in the Buy in Advantage book is that young manager's perspective that he is a leader too is absolutely correct, but it's correct to him. And so the
Mm.
opportunity we have is to ask him, what does leadership look like to you?
Hmm.
Tell me what being a leader is to you, because he sees or she sees themselves as a leader, which is awesome. And what we can never know if we just respond, because we know what a leader is. If we respond, we're going to miss the mark because we don't understand what they believe to be true.
Hmm.
So it's understanding others allows us to respond to where they are instead of us trying to make somebody else like them. And our desire to make other people like us is not unnatural because we've been successful. And they say, how did you do it? And that's interesting. But I learned a valuable lesson from a leader named Royal Little, who's an entrepreneur who built Textron Company from one bankrupt woolen mill in Providence, Rhode Island, if I remember the story correctly, and built it into easy-go golf carts and Bell helicopters. And Royal wrote a book, and his book title was How I Lost $100 Million. And I thought, well, that's interesting. Why would he write a book on all of his failures? And in the introduction, he said, you can't learn from what worked for me because you'll never be there. What you can learn from are all the mistakes I've made. So I've devoted one chapter to each mistake. And from that, you can learn. So likewise,
Cool.
I hear leaders talk about, oh, I hate to have those hard conversations. And I was with a group, very successful leadership group, 2 weeks ago, and they're talking about the hard conversations. I said, oh, what makes a conversation hard? You know, when you have to tell somebody something they don't want to hear. And I said, give me an example. And they said, you know, like a performance review. And I said, okay, let's back up. A leader will have a clear alignment and agreement on what somebody's objectives are and how their work is measured, how it shows up in the scorecard, such that I can ask that person anytime during the quarter, the year, hey, what are your key objectives and how are you being measured? And they can tell me. If they truly have that information, that person is perfectly capable of evaluating their own performance. So the performance review is listening instead of telling, and it's hearing them describe how they believe that they are performing and what they believe is working and not working. And from that, as a leader, by listening instead of telling, we can then respond and share additional perspectives. And so actually, it doesn't become a hard conversation at all because there's no judgment, there's deep listening, and then there are questions, there's observations. Well, if you consider this criteria, if you consider the timeliness with which we're getting the objectives accomplished, how would you evaluate yourself? And ask questions. Because if we have the right people, they know what's going on better than we do because I'm not with them 7/24.
What are some kind of subtle red flags you see leaders do?
Fail to ask questions, for example, at the end of a meeting. Fail to ask the question, what worked and what didn't work in this meeting? Because I can't tell you, humbly how many meetings I've left thinking, wow, I really rocked it in that meeting. It was my meeting. It was really great. And for other people, they're going, what a waste of time. I was thinking about what was on my to-do list and what else I want to do. And where do you want to go to lunch? And so I don't know how others experience unless I ask simple question, what worked, what didn't work in this meeting today? At the end of a meeting and at the beginning of a meeting to ask, what are your expectations? What would make this meeting a great use of your time? And that doesn't matter if it's a one-on-one meeting or a meeting of 10 or a meeting of 100. It's what would make this a great use of your time, because unless we're a mind reader, we can't walk in knowing what's in people's heads, right?
I find, Dave, as I get older, I have more questions than I have answers.
Nice.
And so it's amazing to me that like these kinds of questions, I heard one story you talk about how somebody wanted a raise and they didn't want to give a raise because it'd be different from all the other people. And they ask him why he wants a raise and he wanted to go to the movies. You want to tell it, I don't want to ruin the story, but just asking these questions really gets to the root of the problem.
Yeah, that was the father-in-law of a young manager, and the father-in-law had attended one of our sessions, and the son-in-law said, I can't give him a raise. And the father-in-law said, well, do you know why the raise is important to them? Because it's not about the money, it's about something else. And when we understand that, we can then deal with the issue. And what it was, the son-in-law's employee's girlfriend wanted to go to the movies every week, and he couldn't afford the popcorn and the tickets.
It's expensive.
And so the solution was, instead of giving him money, give him tickets. Okay, we're going to give you tickets every weekend to the movies for you and your girlfriend. And that addressed what the money was just a symbol for something else. And that addressed it. And so that was a matter of asking, What's that for? What's that about? What does the money do for you? What does the money allow you to do, have, or be? And yet, money is one of those traps, one of those belief traps that we see over and over and over again as
Mm,
that's what's most important to people. And what we know to be true is it's not what's most important to people. It is definitely important. It is table stakes, but not most important. So I'll give you two quick examples, if I could, of that. One of the companies we work with did a survey of the employees who left them during a year. And they said you can only choose one thing, what caused you to leave. It was equally tied between my boss's poor communications and money, equally tied. Then
hmm,
they went to the bosses of those people and said, what would have prevented those people from leaving? And the bosses, almost 100%, said money. So the polite lie that we tell is, I left for a better job, because it's rude to say, I left because my boss is a jerk,
right.
right? And then we hear this generation is lazy. All this generation cares about is money, blah, blah, blah. We have a new generation coming in. They probably said the same thing about us,
Right.
by the way,
They
back in
sure
the
did.
day.
Mm.
This Gen Z, fastest growing part of the workplace, values impact they can have, and company values and the people they work with equal with money.
Mm,
So if they're not heard, if they're told, your job is this, sit down, shut up, let me know if you have any questions, then they will leave for another job and politely say, I got a better job. Never saying, my voice didn't count. This was a waste of my time. My life is valuable. Leaders listen, managers tell.
mm. I think about Dave. I started my tech firm back in the '90s, and I think about how many employees I failed because I just didn't ask them questions. I just was a young kid. I didn't understand. My first salesperson I hired, I handed him the yellow pages. I said, "Go get me work." I mean, that's just. I'm going to say ignorance, but I mean it's just terrible. I don't know why he accepted that, but you have to ask more questions. How do we? It's very interesting that Gen Z, how they measure impact uh, equally as money. That's going to be very, very tough for some of these organizations. I mean, how are they going to balance, you know, driving bottom line and still satisfying company vision and making these employees happy? Is that a tough line to balance?
It's not. It is not what we've been taught traditionally to do, but it's not really tough.
Hmm.
And I would just make a slight amendment to the question, because it's not about making them happy. It's about
Hmm.
allowing them to feel the work is worth doing. And
Ah.
so, what I'm looking for is people who feel this is worth doing. And this is worth doing means, one, they clearly understand the purpose, and we'll talk about that later, I'm sure, the purpose of doing it. And then they feel like they've made a difference. And so, how do you allow people to make a difference? It
Hmm.
takes extra effort. It takes the leader, for example, to set the stage for what's important, why it's important, what it is we're trying to do, the measures, and then asking for people's involvement in better ways to do it. Because, particularly in times of rapid change, which we are experiencing right now in government policy and a whole bunch of other fronts, we are more powerful if everyone in the organization is attuned to opportunities and challenges, as opposed to a few people in a corner office trying to decide how to respond. I'd rather have everybody's genius in how to respond.
Hmm. When I talk to I don't really like to give advice. I just generally I said, look, this is what's happened to me, and it's kind of similar, and this is what I learned. But when asked the three biggest lessons I could that I learned from having a small business, having the tech business, is first of all would be to join a peer group. It changed everything I did. I know you're very, very very, very deep into the young entrepreneurs. Two is get some kind of business operating system. There are many. I know EOS is one that you like. I like it as well. And then third, where needed, hire a coach.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like you to comment on all three of those, please, Dave.
Yeah. I met a gentleman from Seattle this weekend, and I asked him about his business, and he said, I built a construction business from scratch, and I now have 100 employees, and we're pretty successful doing civil projects. And I asked him about peer groups specifically, and he said, you know what? I identified 6 people who I thought were really smart in this business or adjacent spaces and asked them to meet with me quarterly as a
Wow.
board, not
Wow.
to tell me what to do, but to share issues and get feedback. So I think peer group, really important. Entrepreneurs Organization, EO, is a very valuable group of peers and is in most cities in the US and increasingly outside the US as well. Young Presidents Organization is another group that I would recommend for companies, say, with turnover greater than $20 million. So, peer groups, really important. Operating systems, pick one. EOS is great, 40X is great. There are other systems. We've built a system called SAAS for Strategic Alignment and Accountability. Because what we observed, even with companies using EOS, that we get great ideas and we all agree to a plan, and then we go back to work.
Hmm.
And a year later, we come back and say, yeah, well, that was a great plan, but Joey, this came up and that came up and we couldn't do it. And, we were traveling that week. And so the issue is, how do we get aligned, which is all of us are smarter than any of us. And we talk about ways to do that in the buy-in advantage. And then it's, how do we hold each other accountable? So this is different than the leader having the obligation to saying, you'd better do this. Have you done this yet? I told you to do this, Smedley. To holding each other accountable and asking, look, I know you took on a big, saying to a peer, I know you took on a big objective this quarter. How are you doing? And how can I support you? That's the peer accountability model. But having some operating system we think is terribly important, whether it's
Hmm.
strategic alignment accountability, EOS, 40X, it doesn't matter. And then finally, having a coach is someone you can confide in your fears, because it's trite but true. It is lonely at the top. And everybody, not everybody, this is a story. Everybody's trying to game you, is what I was going to say. Instead, everybody's going to present their point of view forcefully. Everybody wants to influence, not everybody, but many people want to
Many.
influence you. And you're having a lot of discussions in your head, and it's helpful to be able to share that. So I'm curious, how did your coach serve you?
Yeah, I have a couple, and it just depends on what area they're in. It's humbling, hiring a coach, and it's got to
Mm.
be the right fit, and you know, um, it is humbling, but it's always worth it. And you manage expectations, you set priorities. How about yourself, Dave? How's coaching been for you?
So I both, as you know, I serve as a coach and I have a coach. And in coaching clients, our belief is meet the client where they are
Hmm.
and understand what they believe about the world, and then introduce questions that they can consider, which might enable them to get better results.
Hmm. What's the difference between a coach and a therapist?
It really depends on how you define coach. And I define coach not as somebody to tell you what to do. Here's what you should do. You mentioned earlier someone who shares experiences. And to me, a coach is someone who can ask great questions and share experiences. I make up stories in my head about therapists that they're trying to go really deep with you and have you lie on the couch and say, uh, what do you see when I say grasshopper or something? I
Hmm.
don't know.
Hmm.
And therapists, many of us, if not all of us, have trauma that we are dealing with. And therapists definitely have a role. A coach is not necessarily about dealing with trauma, it's really the application, whereas a therapist sometimes goes to root cause. That's what I'd make up, but I'm no expert in that area. I just know coaching that's worked for me, and I've had the blessing to work with others as a coach that's really changed their lives.
I've had the great privilege of talking to both here on the podcast, and what I've come down to is a therapist looks back, a coach looks forward.
Interesting.
I
And
think
I
that's
would,
right.
for me, looking back sometimes is required to look forward,
Mm,
to go to the root. So, one of the things that I've observed and learned through my training and education is that we all walk around and see the same things differently than other people see, but
mm,
we don't always remember that. In
hmm,
other words, I can show one of the things we do is I show a picture of a stop sign to a group of people. And I ask them, what does the camera see? What does the camera see?
hmm,
And they'll say, oh, it's a stop sign. And I'll say, oh, is that what the camera sees? What does the camera see? And then we get to, oh, it's a red, octagonal sign. And go, oh, okay. And it has letters. Oh, it has letters. And you break it all down until you get to the point to realize we are making up a story in our head that this piece of metal that has a certain shape and colors has on it symbols that we interpret as letters.
hmm,
When we interpret the letters together, it makes the word stop, and the word stop has a certain meaning. But all that is stuff we are told to believe or a story we make up. One of the hardest things for leaders is to separate what does a camera see
mm,
versus what is the story we're making up. And the story we're making up is based on our experience. It is very true for us, but this is where I was talking about your six, because your story is different than other people's story. When we look at the exact same data in the company, we will have a different interpretation of what it means or what the cause is. So, one of the things great leaders do is they share information they want to discuss ahead of time so that everybody can participate, because half the group will process overnight and half the group will process right away. And we want everybody's input. And we'll ask specific questions about the data and then be open to all the different viewpoints we heard so that
hmm,
we can choose exactly what the problem we're trying to address is before we start on addressing the problem.
hmm,
The alternative is we walk into a meeting and you, as the boss, say, you know what? Our shipping is running behind. We're not meeting our deadlines. What's going on here? And somebody throws out what they think the problem is. Person two responds to person one. Person three piles on. We have not examined what the data is or what the issue is we're trying to solve. And therefore, we are not tapping into everybody's genius.
hmm,
Very different is to say, what is the data? What does the camera see? What might be the problems here, and listing them all out, and then collectively selecting one problem to address.
hmm,
One, not all of them, one, because otherwise we're all solving for different problems. All of our solutions come from our perception of what the problem is, our experience, which is wonderful, but it makes for a very dysfunctional meeting. And people leave the meeting going, I think they missed the mark, but whatever. Everybody
hmm.
agreed, so they must be right. So good luck with that. And that's not helpful in an organization. We need to get everybody's experience weighing in on what's the real issue here, and then prioritize what's the one issue we're going to start solving, and then go through a process. We talk about in the Buy-in Advantage this process of drama-free problem solving. And that's simply, instead of jumping to solutions, we missed all the steps of what are the different problems that could be going on here? What's the one we're going to address? And then asking the question, when we know the one thing we're going to address, asking the question, what does great look like? When we come up with a solution, what would that solution consider? Because only after we answer that question can everybody fully participate in addressing the same thing. So you might say, a criteria, what great looks like is we got to solve this in the next 2 weeks. Well, that's different than if we're going to come up with a solution for the next 3 months. You might say, we can't spend anything on any more resources. Or you might say, you know what, if we need to bring in outside resources, let's bring them in. That's not what the solution is. That's what's okay and not okay in a solution, so that we can all then bring our brain power to whatever the criteria, whatever the checklist in our head is. Whatever the checklist in our head is, everybody can participate. And when everybody participates, we then now have the freedom of choice as opposed to following the path of one particular solution brought up by one person based on what's in their head about what the
Hmm.
problem is and what's in their head on what's the checklist of what's important here. So this solution seems like it takes more time. Check. It takes less time because we don't go through wasted effort. Check. And so that leads us to one of the principles in the buy in advantage, which is slow down to speed up. Slow down to speed up. If we want to knock out a problem once and for all, let's slow down and get everybody's best thinking on it and come up with solution that leverages the problem we're addressing and the checklist in our head and be done with it and solve it, as opposed to it's going to recur and recur and recur.
Hmm. Perspective is another reason why I love having these conversations. I'm still amazed to this day how I can look at something and the girlfriend could see something completely different. She smells things I don't smell. She sees colors I don't recognize. It's just amazing. And so you've got to have the same mentality when you're in the workplace. People see and experience different things and view them differently.
Yeah, and you know what? We're at a disadvantage in the U.S. and in other industrialized countries because we are taught for years at school that there is a right answer,
Hmm.
and we're also taught that the teacher has the answer. So we're
Hmm.
taught to go out of our way to guess the right answer, and we're taught that the teacher has the answer, and somehow that gets transferred over into business, so that as leaders,
Hmm.
we're supposed to have the answer, or the bigger fallacy that there is a right answer, because there are answers, there are not a right answer.
Hmm.
There are answers that fit different checklists and answers to different problems, but there is not a right answer. There are answers. So, as a leader, if we can maintain our curiosity about, hey, what would somebody else see? You mentioned your girlfriend smells things differently,
Oh my
sees things
goodness.
differently.
Yeah.
And that's brilliant because that's in your blind spot. Those are not things you see because of who you are and where you've been. But when we can put the collective together, all of us are smarter than any of us.
You bring up an interesting point about, only having one answer. And so this is the kind of discussion like art versus science, where in science it's math, there's one answer, that's it. Whereas in art, it's a bit more fluid. It depends on some circumstances. When you approach things, Dave, are you more art than science?
Absolutely. Now, let me just clarify that science is a process. And so we
Mm.
are big believers in process, which 40X, EOS, strategic alignment and accountability is about the processes we apply. And the book has processes, drama free problem solving, for example. But those processes are to allow the freedom of art to occur.
Mm.
It's no different than saying, here are the paintbrushes, here's the easel, here's the stand, here's the light, and allow you to create whatever you want. But having the structure of an easel, paintbrush, paints, etc., is the structure. So to
Hmm.
me, science is the process, and art is what brings out the unique beauty in each single person. And so I've often said, you know what? You can hand your strategic plan to any competitor. It doesn't really matter if they know what your plan is, because what determines results is how a company executes
Hmm.
and how well they execute and what their culture is like, not what the plan is. You can give me a B plan and a healthy A team that has buy in, and I'll beat an A plan all day long if the organization is not healthy.
Hmm. Yeah, using your gut, I'm at 150 yards, Dave, and there's just a slight wind, little uphill lie, pins in the middle, everything's pointing to an 8 iron. But you know what? My gut says I need a little bit more. I'm gonna go with the 7. So you get all the science to bring in all that factors, and then you ask your gut what the answer should be. Should you just rely on it or should you make a change? This is what you're really employing here.
Absolutely. You know, the human body is actually wired for three brains. And we go through these years of schooling just using the brain in our head. There's a right answer. The capital of France, Paris. 2 plus 2, 4. And we are basically cut off from our heart, the brain in our heart, and yet we use it in language like, it really makes my heart happy. It's a broken heart. And we are cut off from using our gut, which is your gut feeling. And so, what I think a healthy organization has, an organization that has buy in, invites all three brains to the business place to get important stuff done. And so, one of the analogies for our listeners in the US is most of us are aware of Friday night lights. You've been to the local high school and seen Friday night football games. You've seen parents jumping up in the stands and enthusiastic and yelling at the coaches, the refs, the players, whatever. And that's bringing their full selves to Friday night lights. How is it that we've allowed that full passion and enthusiasm to be checked out in the parking lot when people show up for work and they just sit down and go, "What would you like me to do?" "Okay, I'll do it. Glad to be here. Thank you." And we've lost that full passion. We've lost people bringing them their full selves to the workplace. And what a missed opportunity. Imagine how results would be different. Gallup for 3 decades has shown that basically employees are checked out at work in the US. It's not that they're not happy. Sure, I appreciate the benefits. Thanks for the pay. It's not about happiness. It's, are they fully bought in? Are they fully engaged? Do they feel like, wow, what I'm doing is making a difference here? My voice really counts. They value me as a human being. And we talk in the book about human beings versus human doings. There's a lot more there, but organizations that honor the human being and all the different experiences and insights and all the different emotions that we can bring to the workplace is where greatness happens. That's the Friday night lights.
Happiness versus buy-in. I find I have friends who often get stuck in the trying to control the things they can't control. So one of your points is that trying to make somebody happy, you have no control over that, but you can control the vision, the mission of the company, and show that it's a great place for them to buy into.
And then ask them how they're buying in. Share the vision. And, we talk about what vision is and what vision isn't in the book, but share the vision with people beginning in the interview process. And instead of saying, "Hey, I want you to know our vision is this," it's, "Here is our vision. How do you see yourself in a vision? Or what's this bring up for you?" To understand, is their vision alignment? Is that something that excites people? Or do they see that like watching paint dry?
Right. You mentioned your book, the Buying Advantage. What do you want the reader to come away with after reading it?
Yeah, I want them to come away with this idea that if we can get human beings engaged with their heart and their gut and their brain at what the important work we have to do here, if they can be fully engaged, the results can move to game-changing results level, and it doesn't cost a thing. And there are so many processes and techniques in the book, but it's like we talked about Golf Digest before. We start with a self-assessment, and we give you a self-assessment for you and the team, because you all see things differently, to identify, where do we start? What are one or two things we can do differently as a team that would have the biggest impact? Because as an outsider, I couldn't tell you what's most important to get done. But what I can tell you is teams that have full engagement, they have the Friday night lights excitement, will get a lot more done than teams that say, "Just tell me what to do, boss. I'll get it done," which is wonderful. And so this is not about anarchy. This is not about everybody telling the boss what's going to happen. This is about tapping into everybody's unique vision and expertise to figure out what it is, how it is we want to do what it is that's really important.
Why write the book? I mean, where did it come from? Was it there just waiting for you? Did it write itself?
Yeah, I'd like to say, oh yeah, it was easy. I just woke up one night and wrote the book. It doesn't work that way. It's actually been years in the making, and I felt like there were I've been blessed with a great education. Got an MBA and a degree in accounting, and all this fancy stuff.
Yeah, Harvard.
And what I lacked was a real application of engaging people, because people really don't show up on the balance sheet or the accounting statement.
Hmm.
And yet people are the difference between great companies and mediocre companies. And I felt like I wish I had this knowledge before. And like you were talking about peers as one of your learning sources,
Yeah.
I learned this from peers. So this book is really full of stories of what I've learned from other people a lot smarter than me about what's worked for them, and then organized it into key ideas and themes. And I will tell you that, I had a draft of this book 3 years ago, and my coach said, "Hey, it's pretty good. And like a lot of first time authors, you have about 5 books in one. How about if we pull it and try again?"
Hmm.
And that is humbling to hear. I could have just pushed ahead, said, "No, no, 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 this is right." And that is not all of us is smarter than any of us. All of us is smarter is saying, you know what? There must be something to that message. And so it's like many other things. Publishing a book at this level is a team effort.
Sure is.
It may be my ideas, but I have 3 different editors who are involved. I have people giving me feedback all the time. And you talk about discipline and practice. One of the
Yeah.
things my coach said to me is, I said, "I know I'm not a very good writer." And I know that to be true. And she said, "Okay, so you're going to write a weekly newsletter." And we came up with the criteria, and it's going to be no more than 450 words. It's going to share a story I learned about an organization or a principle from that week. And it will have a connection question every week that leaders can ask their teams that allow people to connect as human beings. The discipline of writing 450 words every single week, except I take Christmas week off, so it's probably 51 weeks a year. The discipline of doing that has made me a much better writer.
Hmm.
And so I know that you've learned through your own experience in your own life the importance of discipline, which I also think of as habit.
Hmm.
But it's habit against a specific goal, which in the newsletter's case is sharing inspiring insights to cause you to think about how you do things and what's right for you, and then to do it with consistency and to make it meaningful, easy to read, and make people go, "Huh, that's interesting," and give them something to think about, is a muscle I didn't have.
Hmm.
So that really prepared me for becoming a better writer for the book. So the book was really I would like to influence the lives of millions of people. And they're going to be people I never meet. And the way I see that happening is by providing proven tools to leaders I'll never meet. And leaders, I don't mean CEOs. A leader can be an informal leader. Great leaders are informal leaders. It could be a shift supervisor on the third shift. It's whoever is responsible for creating great and creating an environment for other people. And just because your bosses don't practice everything in the book is not an excuse for you not to, right?
Hmm.
And so I want to
Good
change
point.
lives. I wish I knew this stuff back then. This is really a book for me for when I was a young leader. Here's what I wish I knew.
Hmm. That's a trait of a remarkable person, Dave. Getting what they've learned that helps them and now sharing it with others. I remember one story I heard you talk about, just the art or the science, I'm not sure, of just asking questions, but it was a dealership there in the general Arizona area where you had the salespeople actually ask the people why they wanted a car. Fascinating.
Yeah.
Please please share.
And the salespeople resisted me. I'll tell you what the salespeople said. It was like, kind of under their breath, they said, "Garrison, that's the stupidest question in the world. They want a car because they want a car. That's why they
Right.
came in here. What do you
Right.
mean?" And I said, "No, there's something more to it. What I want to know is a couple of things. One of which is, what does having a different car do for you?"
Hmm.
And there was one gentleman who said, "It allows me to keep my house." This was the next month when I came back and said, "How's it working?" This gentleman said, "It allows me to keep my house."
Hmm.
And I said, "What does keeping your house have to do with getting a new car?" He said, the customer said, I live 45 minutes from work because I can afford the housing out there. in a suburb of Phoenix. And he said, I need a car because I need reliable, affordable transportation so that I can continue to live 45 minutes away in a
Mm,
house that I really want to be in, as opposed to having to move closer to my job and being in some crammed up apartment. And so,
mm.
actually, what they were buying is security to stay in a place they wanted to live.
Hmm.
Because, as I said earlier about money, the question about money is, what is money doing for you? And that young employee said, allowing me to get tickets for my girlfriend to go to the movies. And so we never know what somebody's motivation is unless we ask.
Dave, has there been anything in the last month or so that you changed your mind on?
Ugh, all the time. I am humbled all the time about different beliefs. And one right now um, is the political situation, both globally and in the US. And my mind changes as I listen to different opinions, particularly
Mm,
opinions different than mine.
mm,
And it changes my perspective. It doesn't mean it's, oh no, I was all wrong. It was, wow, I never considered that aspect of this
hmm,
situation.
mm,
And so I learn and learn and learn. And if I had a conversation with a really successful CEO the other day, and he was explaining to me his views on the current situation, because I said, how do you plan for your business in the current environment? And explained to me his assumptions about the current environment. And I could have interrupted and said, no, 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 I don't think you're right about that. But I would not have learned anything. But by letting him run through his worldview, it was like, wow, that's different than mine. And I can really learn from it.
wonderful. Wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wish there was a lot more than that, as opposed to, let me tell you why I'm right and the other guy is wrong. It's like, eh.
Especially in politics, we see all too often people kind of dig in, and I reserve the right to change my mind on any given subject, given new evidence. I mean, perspective is everything. So you
And,
mentioned discipline before. So I started my business in the '90s, and it was 14, 16-hour days. Dave, you were no stranger to this, I'm sure, and putting my health in the back seat. And next thing,
yeah.
yeah, next thing I know, I'm in front of the doctor, and she tells me that I'm 340 pounds, and if you don't lose this weight, you're not going to see your daughter graduate. My daughter was just born, so scared
Mm,
the life out of me. Driving home, punching the steering wheel. What have I done to myself? It's not me anymore. It's now I've got a family here. I've got to, stick around. So I spent the next 6, 7 months, lost about 130 pounds.
wow.
Kept it off. So you can't look at losing weight as like a finishing line, right? You've got the lifelong changes you have to adopt. But when I ask people always say, "What's your secret? What you do?" And I just said, "There's no secret. Discipline. That's how I did it. Focus, motivation, willpower." How does discipline play a role in your life, Dave Garrison?
Yeah, great question. I find it discipline to me is about enthusiastically adopting habits that serve me well.
Mm.
And so it's not so I could say, let's take losing weight as an example. I could say, I love nuts. I could say, I've got to stop eating nuts, stop eating nuts. And it's like saying in golfing, don't hit the ball in the lake, don't hit the ball in the lake. And it's not very helpful. But
No.
instead, if you can identify what the positive outcome you're really looking for is, and then asking yourself, what choices do I want to make that will lead me to that positive outcome, and reframing the issue as positive choices, which are habits, and then giving yourself some appreciation for changing those habits. And so
Hmm.
I work hard too, and don't always do a great job, but I work on celebrating the wins as I go
Mm.
along.
Mm.
And wins in habit changes are interesting because, honestly, nobody's ever knocked on my door and said, hey, congratulations on those habit changes.
Hmm.
It is totally driven from self. So if we're always looking to others for reinforcement, we may not be totally successful. But the habit changes that led to the reduction in weight, and you can celebrate the habits. The weight is what's in the rear view mirror. the habits are out the windshield.
Hmm.
And so we have a lot of times that companies look in the rearview mirror at their results when results like income statements and stuff tell you about what happened 6 months ago, not what's happening now.
Hmm.
And so we talk to leaders about focusing on those activities that will drive the future results. So I'm imagining in your weight loss, you made different choices and didn't feel you were depriving yourself. So what habit choices did you make?
Well, I
How
mean,
did you?
I love hamburgers like you love, nuts. I just didn't eat 5 of them. I had 1 and I, I just moderation. I used to drink a lot of soda. I don't drink. I mean, just wasted calories there. And, just like you said, just take a step back and, make a journal of what you're consuming, what you're doing, and cut back, and you won't miss it. Now I have a soda, I spit it out. How did I get used? It's so sweet. I can't believe it. But so yeah, you don't feel. I hear this often. Like if I change this habit, I'll deprive myself of something. Well, substitute it with something that's healthy, or substituting with something else. You could still certainly have nuts, just maybe not as much.
Yeah, a great entrepreneur that I have a lot of respect for, and in fact inspired me to write this book. We were in the Singapore airport at 6 a.m. one morning. A long story, but he gave me the path to write this book about 10 years ago. And he said to me the other day, he said, "Yeah, I love nuts too. So you know what I do is I have 10." I said, "What do you mean you have 10?" He said, "I just lay out 10 nuts and I have 10 nuts during the day. And I'm conscious of eating them and I eat them one at a time." So it's a
Wow.
habit change kind of thing. And in the book, The Buy-in Advantage, what we do is we lay out different habits you can use because I'll give you an example. One thing that is often modeled is leaders must tell people how to do things. And somebody will come and knock on our door and say, "Joey, how do you want me to blah, 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 blah?"
Mm.
Our habit is to say, "I'll give them the answer," because you're trying to be helpful and you want to share your experience, which is great, but it doesn't serve you and it
Yeah.
doesn't serve the organization. It's the discipline of asking a question. Well, tell me how you've thought about this.
Mm.
What solutions have you thought about? Tell me what's important in a great solution so that by using the habit and discipline of asking questions, you learn where their thinking is so you can build their thinking muscle. So you can build their judgment muscle because that's the muscle that will serve them in the future. And as we learned from Royal Little earlier in this podcast, what you faced is never going to be faced again. That was your time and that time, not now time. And so I don't know what they're going to face in the future, but I know we can apply the habit of critical thinking. I know we
Mm.
can apply the habit and discipline of curiosity, or we can just tell them what to do. Now, if there's a fire in the building
Right.
or a chemical leak, let's skip all this stuff and go right to here's what we can do. But otherwise, we confuse efficiency and effectiveness. And effectiveness is taking the time to build human capacity in an organization. Efficiency is just here's what you ought to do.
Mm. Yeah, don't give a man a fish, teach him how to fish. I always kind of fall into that trap, Dave, of when somebody says, what's your advice on this? And it's a trap because they just want an answer. So I say, this is something that happened to me that's very similar. This is what I did, and this is what I learned. I think I mentioned this before. Take from it what you will, so that hopefully they have to ask. And when we keep asking these questions, we're really like Simon Sinek said, we're really getting to the why, right? Why? That's what we ultimately want to find out.
Yes, it's very true. And the word why is a tricky word in my experience because the answer to the word when you ask a question that begins with why, what's the first word that
Because,
answers? And
yeah,
because is a defensive word.
right.
And so I love Simon Sinek's work and his approach. And I just would change out the word why
Mm,
and use the word what. Like what
mm,
allows you to, or what would you consider when?
mm.
Because why puts people in a defensive, and I don't want people to be in a defensive. And for those people who live maybe in the Northeast, know of the Amtrak, the rail system. And what I'd argue is if I tie you down to the Amtrak and you hear a train company coming, you will be a lot less resourceful than if I put you on the South Jersey shore at the beach and you hear the waves and it's a beautiful day and you've got a cold drink. You'll be resourceful and be able to think of all the different possibilities. And so, as leaders, one of the things we want to do is allow people to feel they are in a very safe space. They're on the Jersey shore and they can consider all the possibilities, as opposed to, why'd you do that, Joey? Just why'd you do that? I can ask the nicest way I can. It's still going to come out as, what were you thinking?
What motivates you, Dave?
I think I'm motivated by a desire to return the gifts that have been shared with me. So many people have helped me on my journey, and I'm motivated to support people not by telling them what to do, but by helping them to discover their truths. I'm motivated by opportunity. I'm motivated by love. I'm motivated by passion. My greatest, in the work I do, my greatest thrill is seeing teams achieve things they didn't think they could achieve. And when we work with a team for a year and we don't see things move, or leaders say, fix my team, that's when we politely say, I think we're done, because it's not worth our time and we don't want to waste other people's time. When we see teams say, well, I couldn't do all that, but I did a bit of it, and look how things changed, or we just had a record year, or we just made a record sale, or look at the engagement scores in our company, or look at our retention rate. Our turnover rate fell by half. And we tell the story in the book of a leader who said, I am being asked by my bosses to cut $1 million a year from the budget, and I've done everything I could to cut expenses. And I've asked all the leaders, how do we cut expenses? And I said, this guy's really talented, very experienced. And I said, what's your turnover rate? And he said, I don't know, I'll find out. And he told me his turnover rate, and it was something like 60%. And I said, do you understand the costs of that 60% turnover rate? Because it's not just the time spent interviewing, selecting a candidate, training the candidate, onboarding the candidate. It's also the stress on everybody else who's left to pick up the slack because they're not there. The stress of having to pick up the slack, the cost of the turnover is enormous. A year later, he came back to me and he said, I just want to thank you. I found the $1 million. And I said, well, you're welcome. How did you find it? Because frankly, I hadn't remembered the conversation. And he said, well, I just addressed the people issue, and my turnover rate fell by half. And I said, what were the benefits to you? And he said, you know what? We have a lot better decision making, a lot better input, a lot better creativity, because we have people with more experience, because people have tried things and learned things, as opposed to a constant treadmill. And so that's back to the story of, people will tell you they left for a better job. And that may be true in a very small percentage of cases. Research from Gallup suggests people who are truly bought in require at least a 25 or 30% pay raise to leave for another job. And so if people leave for another job for a 30% pay raise and it meets their needs and it meets their dreams, I say congratulations to them and I celebrate. But if it's not meeting their needs and they're just doing it for money, I cringe and I say, that makes me really sad. I think it's in, so there's so many stories that are not in the book as well, but there are great stories in the book. But one client is in corporate aviation, and they were losing pilots. They were losing pilots to Delta and Southwest. And I said, tell me about that. And they said, well, these pilots join us and they build up hours and then they go to Delta and Southwest. And I say, well, what do you do about that? And they say, well, we don't really publicize it. And I said, but is going to Delta and Southwest what those pilots were looking for? They said, oh yeah, that was in their interest, not in ours. It creates turnover for us. And so that was a story. That was the meaning they made of that data. So we flipped it around and we said, what if we go to the recruiting fairs and we say, look, if you're a professional pilot, if you've got all the skills of what it takes to join the airlines, and you lack some of the experience, join us and let me tell you about some of the success stories. So meet people where they are and help them get where they want to go, and they will serve you well.
Hmm.
And they will give everything they've got because they know you've heard them and you're interested in what's true for them. So in that case, structured turnover, like this is a position where we want you to grow for 3 years, is a healthy thing and different than the willy-nilly surprise turnover of, I thought they liked it here. They're
Hmm.
not grateful. After all we've done, how could they leave this place?
Hmm. So actually plan for it and structure it so they can actually make their exit, because they're not going to be able to match everything the big airlines can match. And so just make that part of the plan. That's wonderful antidote. I love what you said earlier, Dave, about returning the gifts that have been given to you as motivation. That's a wonderful sentiment.
Yeah, and again, I've been blessed, and it's a team effort. And so, if you think I did this and I did that, um, I'd say, wow. Will you look around and see what enabled it? And
Mm,
sometimes I see companies will hire somebody from Amazon because they want the Amazon effect. Like Amazon is one person.
mm,
Amazon is not one person. Amazon is years of evolution. Amazon is one person's vision with years of executional failures that they learn from. And so there are wonderful things about Amazon. But if we hire somebody because they're from Amazon, I'm really fearing that this may not end well because we're not hiring Amazon. We're hiring an individual that has strengths and weaknesses and flaws. And just because somebody has a title in Amazon has nothing to do with your situation. What's worse, with great intention, I sometimes see leaders compound by saying, Hey, Joey, I'm really excited. We've got this great person from Amazon that are joining the team. And it's going to be, they're really good. And I really hope that you meet them. I really hope you like them. And that's wonderful. However, it makes me wonder, what's the matter with us? Are we not exciting? Are we not stars? Are we doing something
mm,
wrong?
mm,
The alternative is to position and saying, if we want to hire somebody from Amazon, awesome. But let's hire them and say, do you know what? We've got a new person coming on board. And I would really appreciate if you would help teach them what it is that makes us successful. Would you take time and help integrate them to be successful in our company? Which is different than the implied message of, they're going to teach us how they do it at Amazon,
hmm,
which is like we lack something. We don't lack anything, but it's always great to have different perspectives come on the team and to say to the team, let's work together to learn from them, but also to integrate them and make them successful here and make
mm,
it a team effort as opposed to like, here's some Hollywood starlet that's coming into our team to save the world. Well, you know what? We're doing okay. Thank you very much,
mm.
Mr. Boss Man, Miss Boss Man.
So, given the motivation, that's a really cool story. I like. Can't think of that impact that way. You have to think of the others, how it's going to impact them as well. So, given the motivation of returning the gifts back to back and love, you said opportunity, impact. How do you measure success, Dave?
Lives changed.
Hmm.
Lives changed. And sometimes you don't even know how and when you're impacting a life, but somebody will come back to you years later and say, do you remember when? Or I had a gentleman who I worked together with in Charleston, South Carolina, 25 years ago, write me and say, I didn't always say it at the time, but the lessons have really served me well, and I've applied them and changed other people's lives.
Wow.
And to me, that's the ultimate compliment. Does it mean I change every life? No, not at all. But a lot of people have changed mine, and they've shared their gifts, and I'm grateful. And if I have the opportunity, I am glad to say, not here's how to do it. I'm glad to say, here is a system that you can apply. Here's a process. You pick and choose what might work for you
Hmm.
and ask questions that help people examine their own path.
Yeah, it's wonderful to have impact like that and know that you've helped just one person. What is the old story where they come up on a beach and there's a bad storm and all the starfish are on the beach and there's this little boy just kind of flicking one in at a time back into the water, and then a person comes by, an older person comes by, says, "You're not going to be able to get all these starfish back." And he picks one up and he says, "Well, I just helped this one," and flicked it back. So it still makes a difference. Dave, I thank you so much for your time. I know we had to switch around the schedule a little bit, but I look forward to talking this, and I love talking to you and how you help people. Anybody watching or listening, how can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, great question. So you can go to our website, which is garrisongrowth.com, GARRISONGROWTH, garrisongrowth.com, or go to buyinbook, BUYINBOOK.com. And we have a team of people that work with clients, meeting them where they are, whether it's coaching, whether it's workshops, whether it's strategic planning, or changing cultures over a longer time. We have a team of people who are engaged and excited about exploring ideas, but we allow people to collectively analyze where they are before we share, here's how we do it, because we don't know what we're doing until people identify where it is they are and what it is that will most impact their organization. So buy the book, share it with your team, and have your team collectively say, where are we? What would work for us? What issues could we address? And our team is always ready to support in any way we can. We appreciate the opportunity. Joey, great conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dave. I appreciate it. Next time I'm in the general Arizona area, perhaps we'll get a cup of tea.
Awesome. Thank you.
You be well.
And you as well. Thank you.
Thank you for listening and or viewing Joey Pinz Discipline Conversations. Please share this episode with one or two of your friends who you think may benefit from the episode. Our website, www.joeypinz.com. There you find lots of resources and you could join our mailing list. Please follow us on all our social media, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Podcast information, the video version of our podcast is on YouTube. Please subscribe. Audio is on all major podcasting platforms. Please follow them. And if you like it, please consider giving 5-star rating. Would really appreciate that. Thank you again for listening or watching Joey Pinz Discipline Conversations.